Good morning, everyone. We're up to Perek Ches, Mishna Ches. Okay. Chavis shel truma shenoled bas sfeik tuma. You have a barrel of truma, and a doubt arose regarding tuma. We have a barrel of truma, and we now have a doubt, a question as to whether this barrel became impure or not. The case, according to the Baratunura, is that actually you have two barrels. And we know that a sheretz, which is one of the dead crawling creatures, that specific creatures that the Torah enumerates, that these dead crawling creatures, if after they're dead, they come into contact with you or other things, it could cause them to become tamei, to become ritually impure. And that's the case here. We know that a sheretz touched one of these two. That's the case. Two barrels. We have one of them and two barrels. One of them we know the dead sheretz touched. We don't know which one. Okay. So that's our question now. Really, the suffix here, the doubt, the question really hangs upon both barrels. Are they tar? Which one is tar? Which one's tamei? Did the sheretz touch this one? Did the sheretz touch that one? That's the case here. So Rebbe Eliezer says, if let's say this barrel was now located in a neglected area, he should then move it to a more protected area. And if it was uncovered, he should cover it. So Rebbe Eliezer is saying here that even though we have a doubt regarding this truma, which means, practically speaking, I can't eat it, can't be eaten because if it's tamei, the truma, that's tamei. Can't burn it for fuel because if it's tar, you're not going to do that. You have to eat it then. So we're really stuck here. We have nothing that we can do with this truma. Nonetheless, Rebbe Eliezer, you have to make sure that it does not come into it's not in a state where there's a high chance of it becoming tamei. And even though it's possible, even though we know one of them became tamei, the problem is, though, we're left with a doubt. We don't know which barrel it is, but one of these barrels is tahar, is pure. And therefore, we still have an obligation to make sure that it doesn't come into contact with any source of tumah in case it is pure. Regular pure truma, there's an obligation to guard it, to make sure it doesn't become tamei, not to put it in a place where there's a good chance it's going to become tamei. I have an obligation. The Torah says, the wording is, es mishmeres shumasai, the guarding of my trumas, of my tithings, of my truma takings. So there's an obligation to guard it. So if we know we have truma that's tahar, you have an obligation to make sure it doesn't become tamei. You have to guard it from becoming tamei. Here, the question is, once we're already in a situation where there's a doubt whether it's tar, and there's nothing I can do with it, do I still have an obligation to guard it from tumah? It may be tamei anyway. I can't do anything with it. Is there still an obligation to guard it? Rebbe Eliezer says yes. And he bases it on the fact that the words of the Torah that I just mentioned are mishmeres, mishmeres trumaisai, which means the guarding of my trumos, plural. It means therefore, according to Rebbe Eliezer says, we see in these words, trumaisai, my trumos, that we're not just talking about one type of truma, we're talking about two types of truma. There's more than just the truma tahara, the pure truma, that one has an obligation to guard from becoming tamei. There's another one. Which one is that? The one that's in a state of doubt. The one that's in a state of doubt as to maybe it's tar, maybe it's not, you still have an obligation to guard it because perhaps it is tar, perhaps it is pure. And therefore, said Rebbe Eliezer, if this barrel is now in a place that's neglected, which means that even if it's covered, there's a good chance the barrel cover is going to come off and some sheretz can come around and fall into it and make it tamei. In an area that's not guarded, that is a strong possibility, and therefore, Rebbe Eliezer says you got to put it in a more protected area where that can't come. Let's say it was in a protected area, but it's not covered. So here too, the chances are, if it's uncovered, the chances of it becoming impure are great, and therefore you got to cover it. Here, the issue is not, as we've been in the previous Mishnahs we've been learning, that an uncovered barrel of wine has a problem that maybe a poisonous snake drank from it and injected venom into it. If that was the situation, if this was the kind of situation that it was left uncovered in a way that we have to be concerned with that, well, then there would be no discussion, because the mere fact that it was left exposed and possibly poisoned would obligate us to get rid of it. So it has to be here that although in this case it's uncovered, still there's no concern that a snake came and drank from it. Perhaps because you were, perhaps because you were there, you were present, and in a situation where there's a person who is present, the snake is going to be too afraid to come. All right, we're talking about a poisonous snake that's alive. But the possibility of one of these of tuma coming to it is still a good chance of it happening, even if you're standing there, if it's uncovered. And therefore, it says Rebbe Lezer that if it's uncovered, cover it. So that's what it means here. If it was left in a neglected area, you then move it, you then put it in a protected area. If it was uncovered, you cover it. That is the opinion of Rebbe Lezer, because he says we still have an obligation to guard it from becoming impure, even though it is in doubt whether it's pure anyway. Rabbi Yeshua says, if let's say this barrel, again, the same case as before, this barrel was actually placed in a protected area, if you want to, you can put it in a neglected area. If it was covered, you can uncover it. According to Rabbi Yeshua, not only is there no obligation to go ahead and protect it, because he doesn't interpret the verses of the Torah as Rebbe Lezer does, to say that there's an obligation to guard Suffolk Truma, I should say Suffolk Truma Tahira, that there's no obligation to guard a pile of grain that it perhaps it's pure, perhaps it's not pure. And therefore, so there's an obligation to guard it. But now there's an obligation to guard it. You can also actually take it from a protected area to a neglected area. For some reason you wanted to move this barrel, and then now you're moving into a neglected area, that it can become uncovered and it could become tamei. Yeshua says you don't have to worry about that. Even if now I'm putting it in a situation where the chances are greater for it to become tamei, I don't have to be concerned about that. If it's uncovered, I don't have to cover it. I don't have to go out of my way to make sure, number one, to cover it to make sure it doesn't become tamei. Number two, if I need to move it to a neglected area where it creates a greater chance, that's okay too. As long as the commentaries say, as long as I don't actually directly go ahead and make a tamei. You can't take a dead sheretz and throw it in there. That you can't do. You can't directly make a tamei. But once I'm not directly making a tamei, even though I could be causing it, I could be creating a greater possibility of becoming tamei, or I'm not protecting it from it, no obligation to do that. No obligation to do it, and you're allowed to do it. Gamliel says, don't do anything new here. So Rabbi Gamliel essentially agrees with Rabbi Yeshua. There's no obligation to guard this grain that is perhaps tar, perhaps tamei. Nonetheless, status quo. Don't change anything. Meaning, to go as far as Rabbi Yeshua says, that if it was in a protected area, you can move it to an unprotected area, that far you can't do. Just leave it be. If it's in an unprotected area, do you got to move it to a protected area? No. But if it's in a protected area, to move it to an unprotected area, you don't do that either. You just leave it as it is. There's no obligation to guard it, and you just leave it as is. Don't go doing things, though, that could actually create a greater possibility for it to become tamei. Just leave it be. If it's covered, don't uncover it. If it's uncovered, you don't have to cover it. So Rabbi Gamliel agrees with Rabbi Yeshua. He disagrees with Rebbe Lezer. There's no obligation to guard it. But according to Rabbi Gamliel, you should just leave it as is. I don't have to move it. I don't have to do anything to make it be protected. But I also should not be doing anything that makes it less protected. That is Rabbi Gamliel's opinion, and the Bartanura says, "Halacha Rabbi Gamliel." The halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel. Prohibition against getting a tattoo, to inscribe a tattoo mark on one's flesh. Shenemar, as it states, and the marking of a tattoo you shall not put in yourselves. The definition of a tattoo marking, a tattoo writing, you make a person makes an incision in their flesh. Then they fill that area with ink or in any other coloring matter. When it transgresses this, like it gets lashes. This applies in all places at all times. Both by men and by women. Next mitzvah, prohibition against making a bald spot in over one's dead relative. There was a practice as an act of mourning to create a bald spot in a person, to pull out their hair and to create a bald spot as a sign of mourning over the loss of a close relative. That is prohibited from doing. Shenemar, as it states, you shall not place any kind of baldness between your eyes for the dead. The prohibition is between your eyes, similar to where the tefillin are. That's what the prohibition is. What this means is, making baldness means not to pull out the hair of one's head, again, as a sign of mourning over one's dead relative. This applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. Have a wonderful day.